For myself, I've chosen to center my remarks on the current MEChA situation, which, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, MEChA is a Chicano student group that was created over 50 years ago. It's an acronym. It stands for Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán. It is, I think, perhaps one of the last remaining organizations from the Chicano power movement of the 1960s. There's recently a debate in the organization about the name. And just before I read what I wrote, I just want to preface by saying I don't really care about names. I think that if people are in organizations and they want to change the name of the organization, that's really up to them. I think that there were some things that were said, some assertions that were made about the name, about the word Chicano, and about the idea of Aztlán that I find deeply troubling and very problematic. But as for the name itself, I don't really care about that. But these are my remarks. I am a Chicano, maybe Chicanx. It looks kind of cool with the X's on both ends, so I like it. I am also unequivocally a fervent Aztlanista. I believe in Aztlán and the political potential of that concept. I have spent my entire adult life working to see that potential realized. I am also a revolutionary nationalist. I say this as the spouse of an Anishinaabe woman, father of 4, the grandfather of 7, a 3-decade organizer, a former Brown Beret, a founder of the Chicano Development Center, a college professor, and Marxist. Being Chicanx in my belief and my belief in the political possibilities of Aztlán are important to how I've lived my life, the way I've raised my children, the things that I tell my students in class. Also, to be clear, I have no rants today about whiny millennials or bratty gender warriors who make people say their pronouns. I like millennials. My kids are millennials. And honestly, really, what kind of person are you if you can't address someone the way that they want to be addressed? Get over yourself and your grammar language rules. It's all made up anyways. Currently, there are multiple social media conversations on Twitter and Facebook asserting that the movimiento, meaning the Chicano movement, belongs to the youth. This idea of ownership is absurd in an existential sense. It was absurd in the 1990s, the 1980s, the 1970s, and the 1960s. The Chicanx, Latinx, Indigenous movement does not belong to the youth, nor is it youth-led. The Chicanx movement is, and always has been, an intergenerational effort to secure independence from the settler colonial system. The only people who believe the Chicanx movement is a youth-led movement are possibly, and I want to stress possibly, the youth. And I put that in quotes because I don't know when people say that, who it is that they're actually talking about. Whoever that might be, and older professionals. Mostly it seems college professors who I know for a fact don't actually believe that, but are capitalizing on what they see as the kamikaze actions of students who they are encouraging to revolt while simultaneously distancing themselves from the carnage, remaining silent once the battle has begun by hiding behind mortgages and tenure bids, which is exactly what I believe is happening right now with the MEChA name change. Older intellectuals using younger activists to settle old scores and vendettas. It is a magnificent coup, years in the making, and brilliant in its patient execution. It is through this abdication of movement-building responsibility in declaring or fixing the responsibility for social change solely on the youth that in spite of the non-stop declarations of its arrival, the reality is a youthful, leaderless movement will never arrive. It is imagining politics in the same way small children are assembled on a playground by their parents. Ruckus ensues, friendships and alliances are formed instantaneously, and then everyone goes home for dinner. This surface analysis of leadership and power enfeebles the wielder on the same level as when we accuse each other of being ideologues. We are all ideologues. Ideology is the garbage can from which we eat. Chicanx, Latinx, Indigenous positionalities couldn't even have a dialogue about political futures or possibilities sans ideology. Chicanx, Latinx, Indigenous activists who think they are building leaderless prefigurative movements are for the most part working without an analysis of state power in any real sense. They are placing the actions, feelings, and well-beings of the individual at the fulcrum of change rather than the need to build mass movements that challenge the state. This focus on individual identity is especially ineffective when confronting state power, settler colonialism, neoliberalism, because whether the proponents of this position realize it or not, they have been ideologically co-opted by contemporary anarchism, which is itself co-opted by Christian pacifists in the 1930s. And as multiple scholars and revolutionaries have shown, pacifism protects the state. It is a manifestation of white supremacy. This is written in the pamphlet, Whither Anarchism by Christian Williams, a noted anarchist and author. In my opinion and experience, the type of prefigurative politics performed by machistas at the recent MEChA National Conference is a perpetuation of hegemonic white segregation, a reverse colorblindness that gateguards indigeneity through blood quantum and documentation from the settler government, while simultaneously attacking the political idea, Aztlán, that has served as a space for imagining Chicanx national liberation for the past 50 years. Aztlán has gained notoriety to the point it was referenced on national newscasts and by right-wing pundits in the early 2000s as the Reconquista, and is currently referenced as illegal immigration. Contemporary Aztlán has little to do with the pre-Columbian myth. Aztlán in the present exists primarily as an irredentist political attempt by a strata of the Chicanx community in the United States, the same strata that has over the past 50 years overwhelmingly emerged from MEChA. Aztlán is the main vehicle by which Chicano people have declared a state of conflict with settler colonialism. Aztlán was, and still is, the only demand of the Chicano power movement not rooted in civil rights reform, but that categorically challenges white settler society by demanding political sovereignty. Aztlán is the only demand from the Chicano power movement that has not suffered outright defeat and complete dismissal by the forces of settler colonialism. Aztlán remains the imminent challenge whose danger lies not in the past, but in future political possibilities. Rupert Emerson writes in his book From Nation to Empire that nation can be defined as a terminal community, the largest community which, when the chips are down, effectively commands men's loyalties, overriding the claims of both lesser communities within it and those which cut across it or potentially enfold it within a still greater society. In response to this definition, I argue that Chicano nationalism has brought about a space that we call Aztlán, that is big enough to hold and nurture all of the dialogues that have so effectively challenged misogyny, patriarchy, homo and transphobia in the Chicanx movement, while simultaneously maintaining an umbrella Chicanx identity. Now, many may chafe under this assertion, but as the argument begins, let us agree on this one thing. That challenge to patriarchy, misogyny, homo and transphobia, those resistance narratives, certainly did not happen under the mercifully contrite direction of settler colonial structures. Now, are there those among Chicano indigenous nationalists who embody hurtful and dehumanizing practices? Absolutely, yes. But they hardly represent the totality of the nation, just as supporters of Donald Trump hardly represent the totality of citizens in the United States. Aztlán, as it stands, is a political, intellectual, social, economic, spiritual, and possibly armed challenge to U.S. settler colonialism. If the idea of Aztlán seems fantastical, it is fantastical in the same sense as all indigenous sovereignty, because settler colonial education has consigned indigenous people, meaning also Chicano people, to history as political failures. Professor Juan Gómez Quiñones, in his book Indigenous Quotient Stalking Words, writes, According to denial politics, Indians have no politics. Instead of governance, Indians were said to have authorities. Instead of laws, chieftains. Instead of resistance, violence. Europeans often argue that Indian bellicosity remained unorganized and that most Indian groups lacked even tyranny as a form of governance. Hence, by their own failings, Indians could not be the beneficiaries of rights. This argument not only underlined Indians' alleged inferiority, but in addition allowed Europeans to order them. Latinx proxy political narratives on the behalf of Native people seem natural because whether Latinx youth understand their own motives or not, the infantilized political position of indigenous people within the settler colonial context has been internalized. Indian people have no politics. What other reason could possibly impel a group of Latinx students to paint the idea of Aztlán, the one surviving anti-statist political project of the Chicano movement, as imperialist and colonialist? Imagining they are providing a protection for Native people because according to the settler colonial narrative, Indian people have no political voice of their own. They are unorganized, and as a result of this, these students feel it is their duty to order them. I ask all of you to consider who in this equation are the ones carrying forward the agenda of settler colonialism. The first U.S. census was taken in 1790 and only counted white and black persons. In 1848, when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, ending the Mexican-American War, there were between 70 and 90,000 persons who remained in the former northern Mexican territories that could be legally counted as citizens of the United States. In the 1930 census, the first and only time the question Mexican was used on the census, there were 3 million Mexicans living in the United States. By 1970, 1 year after Ayurista introduces the concept of Aztlán to the Chicano movement, there were 9.1 million. According to a 2010 Pew Hispanic Center report, as of July 1st, 2008, there were 46.9 million Hispanics residing in America, and this number is only looking to increase exponentially over the years. In 2010, the census projections are that 47.8 million people, 33 million or so of them being Mexican American, will self-define as Hispanic. But in 2050, only 40 years from now, that number will grow to an astonishing 132.8 million people, constituting approximately 30% of the overall U.S. population at that point. This growth from 1990 to 2050 represents a 1,359.34% increase over an 80-year period. If I am alive in 2050, I will be 84 years old. My youngest child will be a mere 42 years old, which is a full decade younger than I am today. I point all this out because it is important to understand that this is all happening within your lifetime and mine. It is a brown repopulation, and there is no escaping the brown-bodied growth in politics, culture, and the search for sovereignty. By 2050, 1/3 of all the bodies in this country will be descendants of indigenous survivors. And what does that mean, though, for us right now in terms of present political development? Again, Professor Gomez-Quinones. Being indigenous is the conscious experience of native descent and lived culture historically situated in the Americas, of a historical memory related to awareness of a native group membership, and of an ethos that recognizes exploitation and discrimination, present, past, and future. Indigenism involves understanding the convergence of history and the present, and gaining from this understanding a motivation to change the present. Understand this critical point. Aztlán, as a political and cultural idea, has survived because settler colonialism continues to thrive. Abandoning the political cultural hope of Aztlán is one stage of the final surrender. As descendants of indigenous people, we inhabit and navigate a dystopic and apocalyptic setting unimaginable by our ancestors. People that certainly understood being conquered or conquering, but most likely had little conception of his systemic, intentional extermination centuries long. For the past 500 years, indigenous people have been hunted and murdered on sight, and after 400 years, when the practice of mass human slaughter fell out of favor, we were remitted to the worst geographic areas, euphemistically called reservations or ghettos, locations that are often polluted beyond reason and unsafe for occupancy. Fences and walls are erected to stop our physical movements. The government mobilizes vast armed forces against us. Regular citizens do the same. Our own citizenship and loyalty is constantly questioned and suspect. We are undereducated and left jobless in a world that requires us to work in exchange for our survival. Our native languages are dead and dying. We are denounced as murderers, rapists, and thieves on a daily basis from the bully pulpit of the most powerful person in the world. Asymmetrical war is our constant companion, and all around us, even in our safest moments, the whoop whoop of a police siren is the immediate reminder of how close death always is. This is our 500-year extinction scenario. And yet, as we speak, the one political challenge to the settler colonial state that has been articulated by Chicanos is named imperialist and colonizing towards other indigenous people by Chicano youth because it articulates a desire for political sovereignty by Chicano people. The 2010 census reports that 194,949 Mexican Americans self-identified as Native Americans, making Chicanos the third largest grouping of Native people in this country. Nation is a self-identifier. It is by definition, again, the largest grouping that commands the loyalty of the people. The differences within that group range from the extreme far left to the extreme far right. I believe in a return to history through the end of settler colonialism, and that this end can only be brought about by a protracted national liberation struggle that joins the cultural with the political. Assad Haider writes in his book, Mistaken Identities, Racial Politics in the Age of Trump, about black revolutionary nationalists, saying, what nationalism meant was a political perspective. Black activists organizing themselves rather than following the lead of white organizations, building new institutions instead of seeking entry into white society. That is the essence of the irredentist political project called Aztlán. I submit to you, assembled, that the current U.S. immigration policies are in reality and practice anti-indigenous, counterinsurgency measures designed to stem the growth of potential anti-colonial resistance in the United States. Psychological operations known as PSYOPs are underway all across this globe. Intelligence gathering reaches into some of the most remote areas of this world. And it would be naive to assume that the same long-term, low-intensity disruption is not happening among the fastest growing indigenous population in the United States. The undermining of direct action, pro-sovereignty, anti-settler politics in the Chicano community is perhaps the biggest clue to the active recruitment of Latinx intellectuals on college campuses by the colonial settler state. How can we even begin to imagine that only white professors are recruited by the FBI and the CIA for domestic matters? I am today the same as when I was born, a brown person. However, I choose to walk a path of indigenous resistance. I have devoted my life and my family's fortune to the struggle against settler colonialism. I have done my time in MEChA as a member of Michigan State University, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán for the decade of the 90s, and after that, as an advisor for countless iterations of MEChA at Michigan State. I know about the challenges student organizers face. Today, as a college professor and human being, I also understand the developmental issues young adults are going through, the need to tear down idols. And it might be a pain in the ass, but it is punk as fuck. And I've been there and I get it. And yet, like any grassroots political project, The power of Aztlán lies in the complicating of Aztlán, in the complicating of what it means to be Chicano, knowing that we will arrive at the material truth only through a deep investigation into the internal contradictions. Racially, my life has been a mass of those contradictions. A white mother, a Mexican father, a black stepfather. The cultural, political decisions I've made are constantly informed by embracing the contradictions those three worldviews bring to my awareness. Holding these three pieces of my identity, who I am in my heart, and then coming to the conclusion that I am Chicano and I believe in Aztlán, not because my biological father is Mexican, but because it represents and articulates my political and cultural desire, the total dismantling of the settler colonial state, and by proxy, the end of capitalism. Nation, by definition, is not exclusionary. It is, by definition, the largest grouping of people that can command loyalty. Aztlán is not exclusionary. It is open to all who will allow it to command their loyalty. I'll leave you with the words of Apache Maíz from his book, Looking for Aztlán, Birthright or Right for Birth. He says, "We can no longer hide behind poems, song, dance, talk, articles, fantasy, and maps. The concept of Aztlán as it stands among Chicanos today is frivolous fantasy. It is time to graduate to real solutions and real actions. And finally, I believe the challenge is not the discovery of Aztlán and the birthright it would magically give us, but the challenge of building Aztlán because it is right for birth." Thank you.